All right. Oh, man. Camera died. Cool. Hey everyone. Hey, let me know if the sound's working. I just want to wait until I get like a thumbs up or something from you to know that the sound's good, and then we'll get going. Yeah. So Calgary, yeah, awesome. Thank you. Cool. So today is Tuesday, February 12th, 2019, aka the day that you get introduced to web servers for real. Mark this day down in your little journals. Maybe tattoo this date on your rib cage right here. Nima showed me Express. That's today's big thing. Yeah. So we're gonna start off not necessarily talking about the lecture material, because you had a fairly big thing happen over this past weekend. So you're gonna take a little while to talk about that first. Right? Let me just make a little file here where I'm gonna keep all my notes. Cool. So today is week 2, day 2, and we're gonna do 2 things: test review and intro to servers. Intro to servers. Obviously, though, first I want to just start off by talking about the test. How did y'all like the test? Was it a good time? What's that? It's built very well. Is that a hint of sarcasm? Yeah. With mode. Mode was tough. All right. How else? Like, what are some other thoughts that you have about the test? Calgary, you as well. If you could toss some thoughts into the Slack. Did anybody hate the test? Okay, cool. We'll work our way down. Did anybody have almost no opinion about the test? Cool. Okay. All right. That's good. Did anybody love the test? Neat. All right. So, it was funny because for some people, specifically like the last cohort that I taught, there was one person who couldn't stop raving about the test. Right? Like they loved it. They came back because we did it Friday, and then they have the 2 extra days to do it, and then the Monday they're like, oh, yo, it was so much fun. Oh man, I was just like it was challenging, and it was like they were really into like the green and red, right? They're like, oh, I got so much just satisfaction out of turning all those reds green, right? Like he just wanted to do more of that, right? And then we move on to the project, right? Like you're doing a project this week, and they were a little upset. They were like kind of really wanting to go back to doing more challenge questions. So if you enjoyed the test, take a look at things like Hacker Rank, Advent of Code. There's a thing called Project Euler, right? Generally, these like programming challenges can be a lot of fun, and also you'll find that this is the kind of stuff that you might run into for tech interviews, right? If you want to get good at this kind of stuff, I'm gonna shill the big green book. This book is Cracking the Coding Interview by Gail Lackman McDowell. It's a big kind of like, it's a thing. It's a big book. It serves 2 purposes. One is preparing for tech interviews. It's called Cracking the Code Interview. The other is you could some serious self-defense out of this book. It's big, and it's just filled with more and more and more of those kinds of questions that you did for the assessment test. So Nima says, hey, you have another test coming up. Maybe do some practice if you can find some time. Maybe look into this book. Maybe look into similar stuff. Maybe redo the assessment test that you did earlier. So I'll write down the thing that's called cracking the coding interview. And I'm going to put a little star here, or many little stars, saying, take a look at this eventually before you hop into the job search. Right? It's a good book. Very good book. It's, you find like, buy a cheap PDF copy or something. I'm sure there's like an ebook version. Anyways, what I want to do is specifically just kind of take a look at some questions, show you my method of struggling through these questions. As in, like, I look at the questions about once a month when I do this lecture, and then I always forget what the answers are, and I purposefully don't look at them in the morning so that you get to watch me get upset about it, just to see kind of like what Nima's process is. Would Nima fail the test? So first of all, though, are there specific questions that you might want to kind of take a look at? We know mode. Do you want to take a look at the mode question? Maybe. Any other questions? No? Man, just test was easy, I guess. So we'll just hop into this a little bit. I mean, really, I want to reiterate the fact that you should not need to like write code outside of these functions. You shouldn't need to, right? There are some cases where the linting errors pop up saying things like, I think one would be right here, that there's an extra space after the star, and you have to like erase that space. You might have run into that. You get like 29 out of 30 on your thing or whatever, and it says you have like one linting error. Did anybody run into that? Yeah, so some of us, right? Right. Yeah, you might run into that with the test on like this coming Friday. Some of you might have also run into the fact that like when you're working on the mean function, for example, you need round. Like you need to use round, and if you try to use round in here, it throws another linting error. What was the linting error? Yeah, it said you have to define the function before you use it, and you're like, I didn't even define this function. Like that wasn't even me. Yo, like, fine. So you're supposed to like go and grab it and move it up ahead, right? Right. So little gotchas like that might again come like up in the test on Friday. But for the most part, like you should only be really like writing code within your functions. Now, I also want to just kind of reiterate on the fact that with these functions, we're writing the definition for a function, but we're never actually running it ourselves, right? I'm not expecting you anywhere to write code like count 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever, right? I'm not expecting you to do that. You're defining the definition of the function, right? I notice every time there's like people who take the code and they'll start writing it in JavaScript tutor, right? That's a really cool idea, but the thing is, some of these functions depend on other things, right? And for you to set the thing up properly is a little tough. So sometimes hopping into something like JavaScript tutor is actually harder than just working within the system here, right? Instead, what I'll encourage you to do for the test on Friday is to really make use of console logging things, right? So here I have, function count that takes an R. I don't know what R might be at this point. I'm going to console log it, right? I can console log R, and right now I'm on question 0, so I would go npm run question 0, and I haven't implemented anything new. Like none of my tests are passing. I'm not getting any score, but if I scroll up to where the tests are running, I'll see that right before the failure, it shows me the console log statement that I made. Okay? So this is my personal kind of strategy, is to console log a bunch of stuff, kind of see what's going on, and then I'll know that at least one of the console logs is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the other one's 999, and the other one doesn't have anything in it, which matches what I'm seeing over here. So that's good. Right? So again, when you're trying to debug things in this, my personal suggestion is to make like a lot of use of count. Not count, console log. Now, every one of these functions needs to return something. I'll usually start off by just returning something silly like 0 and just seeing what happens. Just so I know that something's being returned. Something's being returned. Now, you can attack these questions in a couple different ways. One way that I kind of suggest doing it is hit all the test cases that you can in like big kind of broad strokes. The general things. Like, oh, in general, when I call count on an empty array, it should return 0. So I might as well just go ahead and say, hey, you know what? How about my count just always returns 0? Easy. Wham, I got a test case. Then I look at the next test case that's failing over here, and I'm like, okay, well, you know, this one here says I should return 1 when there's one item in there. This one here says I should return the number of things. And my code starts getting probably a little bit more complicated if I go, if array length is 1, return 1. If array length is 5, return 5. That's probably not the best way to do it. So I'll have to think a little bit more. And eventually you might come up with something that looks like, you know, maybe like you might have something like, oh, if array.length, you know, equals 0, return 0, and then maybe you have something that looks like a for loop in here that loops over all of your elements in the array and counts them up with a variable. Or you might go return array.length. Right? You might break this stuff down into that. I'm not doing this to show you the answer to the question right now. I'm doing this to show you that there's like multiple kind of paths that you can take through a question, right? Often what I find is like I will really cling to one answer that I think is going to be correct, and I'll work really, really, really hard at it, and then I'll realize that I'm going about it the tougher way. Like the complete, like much tougher way. It might not be wrong, but it might be tougher, right? So in this case here, I want to jump into things like, like min, like the min function. So can anybody just kind of walk me through like a bullet point version of how you might have solved the min function? Did anybody solve the min function? Cool, okay, I saw your head nod. I'm going to ask you about it. Yeah. How did you solve the min function? Okay. So loop through the array. And then? Cool, so initial minimum value, then loop through the array, and then compare. Each item of the array, and then cool. Okay, and then what do you do at the end? There you go, return min, right? Absolutely, this totally works, right? Initial minimum value, loop through the array, compare that minimum value, you got your conditional, and then you return the thing. This is great, right? I have one question here. What is the initial minimum value? Yeah, the first element of the array. Did anybody accidentally do something like initial minimum value is 0? Yeah. And then you're like, why doesn't this work when the numbers are all greater than 0, right? That's stuff that catches you. So for me, this part here is really important. Breaking the question down into like actual actionable steps that you can explain, you know, in English. What are you going to do? The code, like that'll come later. There's a million different ways to code this thing. Who cares, right? It's this part. This is the stuff people pay money for, right? It's the algorithm, right? That's the important part. So with all of these questions, really, for me, the first step is to, again, break it down into pseudocode like this, right? And then, once I'm convinced that these steps will get me the solution, right? And I'll do that by maybe drawing out in a little notebook a bunch of numbers and running through the steps to see that it will work, right? Once I'm convinced that the algorithm, an idea, actually works, then I can work on actually writing the code, right? The reason I say that is that your problem-solving skills are probably great, right? Your problem-solving skills are, I bet, fantastic. Your coding skills are not just there yet, right? And that's not your fault. This is week 2, right? So, if you can get a foothold with the problem-solving, right, by writing it like the steps out in English, right, you can then focus on writing code that enacts the algorithm that you said you want, right? Because what might happen if you just go directly into writing code is that you're writing code that doesn't actually do the thing that you intend to do, right? So that's something to really, really like be careful about. Now, here, if I was to write this out in code to translate, initial value might be let min equal, and then you said first element of the array, r0, right? I am absolutely obsessed with console.log every single thing. Okay, I would console.log min immediately. Now, I made a mistake actually. The function's called min, so I'm just going to go minimum. There you go. Let minimum equals array of 0, and then I might console log it just to see what it is. Right? Make sure it's the first one. You've got your loop. You could do your loop in a couple different ways, but I'm going to do it as for let I equals 0, I is less than r dot length, plus plus I, length, I plus plus. And then in here, you've written that whole check to see. So if r of I is less than min, then minimum, then minimum equals r of I, and at the end of it, you return minimum. This is cool. This totally works. But there is a simpler way of doing things, right? The array that we're given is not in order, but what if we just made it to be in order and then picked the very first one, right? Like, what if we just did that? Did anybody do that? Cool. All right. So we got 2 in there. 3, was that another hand? Yeah. Right. That's one way to do it. Be like, if it's in order, I'll grab the first one. Somebody asked me, hey, grab the biggest one. Easy. I'll put it in order. I'll grab the last one. Right. So something like this. The algorithm for this might look something like sort the array, return the first. Right. But see, it's just a shift in thinking. Right. So it's easy to get really like stuck on this is the way to do it. Like I have to loop through it and have a variable and do all that stuff. That'll absolutely work. Like that's great. But that's going to require more code than just going array.sort and then return like array like 0. Like there's much less room for error here. Like much less room for error. Right, I need to go array equals array.sort or something, right? Like I have to sort first and then return. Okay. Much less room for error. So that's again something I want you to do is like, don't just jump right into the answer, right? Brainstorm a couple different ways of doing things. If you can only come up with one, right? If you can only come up with one and it feels like it's like tough, stop and go like, okay, there's probably an easier way, right? And I need to like really shift the way that I'm thinking about this problem, right? There's a million different places that I can make mistakes in something like this, and there's really just only a couple places that I can make mistakes here. Okay? If I move down to this max, this is going to be very similar. I'll have to sort somehow, like sort the array. And then return the sorted array's last element. Yeah. The sorted array's last element. Now, that brings me to range. Right? How did y'all do range? Did anybody write a bunch of for loops in here? Inside of range? No. Did you use functions that you had previously worked in? Awesome, right? You can build off of the work that you did before. So here, like, you could easily just write a couple more for loops or go, yo, I did all this work earlier here. Let me call min of r and max of r and get this stuff out here, right? So I'm pointing this out just because this is going to become a theme in your journey as a developer, really, is just like leveraging the work that you've already done before, right? I used to, I still do sometimes, kind of punctuate parts of my lecture with, is Nima a lazy man? And people would be like, yes, he is a lazy man, right? We want to be lazy and do as little work as possible, because look at all the sunshine you want to go like dance and spend your time in, right? It's so beautiful outside. Why would I want to be coding all the time? Yeah, it's my passion or whatever, but like there's other things that I want to do. Okay, let's talk about we could talk about median. How did people do median? What's that? One case for even, and then one case for odd. Okay. And then what did you do in each of these cases? So median was to find the middle number of a list when sorted.
For the odd one,
Mm-hmm.
you can go divide by 2
Mm-hmm.
or round, I guess, we'll do the same. And like the array length by 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can turn that out for even.
Mm-hmm. Can I stop you right there though for a sec? The array, when we get it in, is it sorted? We have to sort it first, right? Because if you do this, return the value at the index in the middle, and my array is 1, 6, 2, 6, 3, 7, I end up returning like 6. Let me just make this odd. 0. I end up returning 6. That might not be, I think I accidentally picked the median. Let me make this 12. That might not be the median. Right? I'll have to sort it first. Right? That's the first thing that we'll want to do is make sure that the array is sorted. So read the questions, right? When sorted. Right? A lot of the time there'll be like good hints in here. Now, let's see. You had a question from mode, and mode's in here. The most frequently occurring number. This one's an interesting question because I can think of like a couple different ways to do this. Some of which may be tougher than others. Does anybody want to like show and tell kind of like what their attempt at this was? Just because I asked you a second ago, I might ask you in a sec. Anybody from this side of the room or from Calgary want to, write out kind of what their... Oh, I should use before declare. Lots of linting errors. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't read the Calgary stuff. I feel really bad. Like that each question helped with the next. That's good. This I don't believe, Gideon. That you don't know anything. I don't believe that. It's just the test is like it's a different kind of thing than you've done through the entire boot camp so far. All right, Tim's writing something. Waiting. Pauline, I thought this one was about me. I didn't realize it was about lint for a sec. Oh. Oh, we got Braden and Tim both writing. It's like a race. So. Oh no. Oh. Oh. Okay. There we go. Okay. So use sort of A and B. Made A and B filter subarray of the same numbers sorted low to high. Populate lat number. I'm actually not sure. Did anybody do something similar to this? Oh, pop the last number. Oh. How'd that work? So you made A and B filter sub. Okay. I mean, I'm sure that works. I'm gonna have to take a minute to like kind of dig through that. The way that I might suggest doing something like this is keep a tally. Right? Keep a tally of occurrences. So if I gave you a list of numbers like 1, 2, 2, 2, 5, 3, 3, 6, 2, 5. If I gave you this list and I asked you which is the number that shows up most often, you have to start from here and make your way down and keep track of how many times you see each number. Right? You might do something like start from the top and count all the ones, and then count all the twos, and then count all the fives, right? Like you might have to go through and every time you see a new one, start a new count or something, right? Think about the way that you would as a human being tackle this problem if I was to give you a big list of numbers, right? My way of doing this might be start off with an empty list of things. Start off with an empty list of things. And then as I loop through the array, increase the place in that list of things by 1 every time I see the relevant number. I've worded this a little bit weirdly, but what I mean is I want a place that starts off all of the entries for 1, 2, 5, 3, 6 at 0, and then every time I see one of those numbers, I increase by 1 maybe. Right? That's something that I could do. Exactly. I could add it to an object. An object would be a great place for this. I could have let num count equal like an empty object. And then as I loop through the array, I might take that number and somehow do something inside of num count with it. So I might use the number itself, like 1. I might use that as the index inside of an object. So num count and I'm just going to assume that it starts off at 0 and say that it should now be num count plus 1 every time. Does this idea kind of make sense to people? I'm keeping a list somewhere. This means that I need to manually say somewhere that start off all num count entries at 0. And there's a couple different ways that I could do this. I could do this outside of this loop with a different loop. I could do it inside of this loop by going if the entry isn't there yet, then start it at 0 first, and then increase to 1. And then at the end of it, once I've gone through and I've counted everything, I need to somehow return the biggest entry in num count. Now, I'm realizing right now that like some of this requires some JavaScript that you might not have already been introduced to and would have had to like look for. So I'm going to put this in the notes as a possible thing, but it's not what I would have expected you to write. Well, the thing is, like, you haven't talked about how to loop through an array for returning. Like, how would you return the biggest entry in an not an array, in an object? Yeah. Okay.
Except that part, we were picking out the value, and that's like a stuff to get a key, not the
Mhm. Yeah.
I had to change the object back to the array,
Yeah.
which was something
There's like object.keys. Is that what you had to do? Yeah.
that's something I don't remember doing.
It's not something we've explicitly taught you, but this is a place where you would go, well, like, how do I get the keys from an object in JavaScript? And Google this, right? Like a lot of these kinds of questions they're going to involve things that you maybe don't know off the bat, right? So like a big part of it is an exercise in like learning to Google things. Forgot to add sort filter. You were going to say something?
I was just going to say another way to do it that's a bit easier
Mhm.
without these objects or anything is you can just like make a loop,
Mhm.
like a for each for the array, and then for each item just set like the number of occurrences or like how often it's one, and then make another loop within the loop to check like if the rest of the items in the array are equal to the first item, and then if so, you just increment the number of occurrences. Like it's kind of like the mode solution to the mode question.
This is the mode question.
Oh, sorry, the other question. I don't know, one of the other ones we were solving.
Like the mean?
Yeah, the mean, like to count. Like basically you just loop through the array like twice.
Mhm.
To see if the second loop like is getting the same value as the first loop.
Oh, okay. So actually, do you want to explain that to Calgary? I just don't. Do you want to write it out? Is that okay? Cool. So your name was?
Rachel.
Rachel has a solution for it as well, and Rachel's going to type it out in the Slack. Are you in the Calgary Slack as well? Cool. Just for like another kind of solution here. The idea here, though, is in one way or another, you need to keep track of how many times you're counting something. I want to, at this point, start hopping into the lecture material for the day, right? And then for anybody who's interested, I think at the end of the lecture, we can continue talking about this for whoever's interested. But we're gonna make a little bit of a detour here. Close the assessment exam. Just gonna make sure there's no more. Sweet, thanks, Rachel. And we're gonna hop into web servers 101. So web servers. There's a little bit that I want to talk about before I actually get into talking about the tool that you'll be using for building your own web servers. We're going to motivate the idea behind a thing called Express. It's going to take us a little bit of time. We'll start off with a little bit of vocabulary. So yesterday you learned about one thing in particular, and what was that thing? What's that? Requests. Sure, requests. Right? Do you remember an acronym or like 4 very important letters? HTTP? Did you talk about HTTP? Cool. What does HTTP stand for? Cool. Hypertext Transfer Protocol. I want to focus on this part here. Transfer Protocol. HTTP is a protocol for transferring information, specifically hypertext, right? And by protocol, we mean that there are like specific rules to the structure of how HTTP requests and responses happen. Right? Always think of protocols in like programming as kind of like protocols when you go over to somebody's house, or like, you know, rules about dating or whatever, like real life human stuff. Like, for example, if you go to someone's house, like, I always ask, do you want me to take my shoes off? Like, should I leave my shoes here? That's a good protocol to kind of follow, right? Shoes. Another protocol would be, you go on a date, it goes really poorly, right? Really, really poorly. Do you call them a whole bunch of times the next day? Probably not, right? That's not according to protocol, right? I'm seeing some people are confused. You shouldn't call people if it when are we seeing each other again? Yeah. So, you know, that's protocol. But like, I genuinely do want you to think about how do humans do things, right? If you're applying for a job, you send a thing, and then you maybe receive a time for an interview. You go to the interview. After the interview, you might email them and be like, hey, thank you for, you know, taking some time to whatever, right? This stuff, what I'm trying to focus on here is, it's not set in stone, right? It's not like this stuff descended from the heavens and they're like, this is HTTP, right? A protocol is just a bunch of people got together in a room and they said, hey, how can we make this thing simpler? Like, how can we agree on one way to do things, right? So people don't get into fights about this stuff later, right? That's what a protocol is going to be for us. HTTP, at its most basic, is one person asks, another person responds. That's HTTP. Question, answer. Question, answer. Right? There's one person who wants all the things. This is called a client. And there's another person who has all the things. This person's called the server. Right? So we're dealing with a request and a response. Now, for the nitty-gritty of how HTTP works, we say that HTTP is it's an R blank based protocol. Request is a good shot at it. Yeah, request, I mean, that's not wrong. It's a resource-based protocol. There are resources. What's that going to mean? Well, anytime you think of something that you might make a request for, right, you're requesting for access to a particular thing somehow. Right, access to a resource, access to a noun, right? I might be asking for a page, or I might be asking for a bunch of data, right? But I want you to be in that mindset of like, what is the thing that I'm asking for? Right? That's going to inform the way that you structure these requests and the responses. So it's a resource-based protocol. And it also happens to be stateless. It's a stateless protocol. Right? Stateless protocol. What does that mean? Yes. Cool. So ask for a thing, get thing, and right. What's that? And transmission. Yeah. Right. HTTP is kind of like when you text one of your like really cold friends. Hey, you doing anything? No. Right? Like, that's HTTP. Right? And like, nothing more, nothing less. You have to be like, hey, are you free later today? Yes. Like, okay. Right? That's HTTP. You as the client have to like facilitate the conversation. Right? HTTP, the server is like a moody teenager. Right? So just do the bare minimum that you ask them to. So everything that the server needs to like form a response needs to be sent with the request. And what I mean by this is everything about like, who am I? Who am I that's talking to you? That needs to be sent with the request, right? What is it exactly that I need, right? What have I done before, right? Those are all things that need to be passed in with the request. The server is not going to remember anything by default about the person making the request, right? So we're going to need to see, like, how do we pack useful info into the request, and then how does the server read that useful info? So your project yesterday was the GitHub downloader thing, right? Did y'all have a good time with that? Meh, right? It's pretty neat. You were making HTTP requests there. So for the GitHub downloader, you made HTTP requests. Where did you make HTTP requests to? It's not like a trick question. To GitHub, there you go. Right? So you made HTTP requests to the GitHub server, asking it questions like, hey, who made jQuery? Hey, what's the, like all this stuff. We're going to be on the other side of things now. We're also going to be the person receiving requests and handling that stuff. Right? That side of things, that's called the web server. Right? The web server. Receiving the requests, handling them, and sending out responses. So the HTTP requests before were into what we call a black box. Right? Just a box that we don't really know anything about. And today we're opening that box. So the reason I said at the beginning that like you might end up tattooing today's date on your rib cage is because today is the day that you get introduced to back-end development. Right? Today's the day that you become a back-end dev. Woo! Yeah, I saw that. Celebration. Because we are working on servers. I'm gonna write some code here. I'm gonna go make server. Listen for requests. Wow, could it really be that simple? Sort of. Okay, maybe not this simple, but it's gonna look like this in a second. What we're gonna do is we're gonna start off by using a module that's built into npm, or sorry, into Node already. Here I'm gonna make a new folder, HTTP test, and inside of this new folder here, I am going to, let me just open it up in my terminal. I'm going to go like npm init to create a new like package JSON. Right now I have a package JSON with nothing in it. Now, I just by default like having all my Node projects have a package JSON. But the important thing in here is that I need to have a file. I'm going to call mine server.js, but you can call it anything. So I have a file called server.js. At the moment, is there any code in here? No, right? I'm going to write some code that's going to say var http equals require http. And then I'm going to console log whatever http is. I'm just going to console log this. So when I run Node server right now, I got a bunch of stuff printed out. Bunch of stuff. And this is the HTTP module that's built into Node. Right? There's all sorts of things in here. I could dig through it if I wanted to. I see a bunch of status codes or stuff. Right? There's actually one called I am a teapot. Yeah, 418. There you go. That's my favorite one. Yeah, it's a long story. It's like a joke status code. It's like an April Fool's status code that got put into the thing. So this is the HTTP module. I can do a bunch of things with it. You've used it to make requests, I believe, yesterday at some point. I'm using it to create a server. http.createServer, and create server is going to take a callback. And this callback is going to take a request and a response, and we'll see why. So I've made a server, apparently, create server. Right? Create server, if I look into the documentation, says that create server is supposed to take a callback, and the callback takes a request, a response. I'm console logging that request, and then down here I'm doing something to the tune of server listen at let's do 8080, and then this is the code that I've written so far. When I go ahead and I run my server, it says listening, and then what does it do? What's that? It waits, and that's really important. The fact that it's hanging. It's not doing anything anymore, right? It hasn't taken me back to my prompt. Like, I can't ls or cd stuff. Like, this isn't my prompt. It's just waiting. I was waiting for somebody to make a request at the place that I told it to listen at. Port 8080. Right? I wrote a number, and what that number lets me do is go to localhost 8080, like that, and press enter. Now, I want you to note this. This thing's spinning. So my browser has made a request now to port 8080 somehow. In my code over here, I've just said listen to 8080, but have I ever said anything about like send a response somewhere? No, I manually need to say that. Okay? I need to, inside of this thing here, we're going to see, I need to be able to handle requests and send out responses. Now, at the moment, I'm just console logging request. And if I hop into my terminal, this whole thing here that got printed out, that's the request. The entire thing that got sent by the browser has been received by my HTTP server and is console logging it right now. There's a bunch of really interesting things in here. If I dig around, I could find things like, ooh, man. Let me copy all this info real quick, actually. Oh, no, here we go. I can find HTTP version major. The browser's saying, what type of version of HTTP am I using? If I scroll down a little bit, I'll also see information about the browser itself. Like, what port did it try to come in through? For some reason, they always have Mozilla written on them. There's the word cookie on here. And these two things right here are really interesting to me. URL slash and method get. So you learned about HTTP methods. What methods exist? Get, post, delete. There's one called put, patch. Right? I've made apparently a get request to slash. And if I try this out now, I go localhost 8080/dogs, and I press enter. This is making a new request now, and I look at the thing that got console logged down here. Whoa, okay. If I scroll up far enough, bear with me for a sec. If I scroll up far enough, I'll find URLs /dogs and method get. And these are things built into that request object that I'm console logging right now. Yes?
So when you ran this, your little bit of code 5 minutes ago, you kept it listening.
I've kept it listening. I haven't closed it. It's still running. A server just keeps running until you turn it off or until it crashes, right? So I've kept it running. See, it's just waiting. Now, it's not super, super helpful for me to console log the entire request, but maybe I'll console log the request method and the request URL. So I don't have to dig through it every time. Now that I've made a change to the server, I have to stop the server and start it again. And now I'm going to try and go to /dogs again. And I'll see that what's getting console logged is cat/dogs. I pressed enter twice. I'm going to go to get/cats. Get/cats. Right? And we can use that info to our benefit. Now, I have this request. What I also have access to is a response. I have access to the response object. So inside of this listener at the moment, or this create server like function handler, I'm console logging the request that comes in, and I'm using the response that hasn't been sent out yet. I take the response and I say, hey, I'm going to slap 200 on it as the status code. I slap that on. Okay? I'm also going to just say, hey, send the response out with some text. And I'm sending it out with the text woo. And if I look at what happens now, when I stop and I start again and I go make a request to literally anywhere, what I get back is, woo, something broke. Response dot not send. Response dot end. My bad. Response dot end. Woo. Let me just start the server again. Make a request to literally anywhere, and I get woo printed out. I want to point your attention to the fact that this thing is not spinning anymore, because it's not waiting for a response. It got the response. So just to go back to the analogy a little bit more, when I think of HTTP, I think of two people in two buildings, one of whom has a whole stack of paper and the other person doesn't. And the person in one building writes stuff on their paper, folds the paper up into a paper airplane, and throws it out to the other like building. The person in the other building receives that piece of paper, they can write back on it again and send it back. That's HTTP. The client is the person who sends out the paper airplanes in the initial, and the server is the one who receives paper airplanes and then sends them right back. So here, I can do anything I want with the response. I could send back woo, or I could send back other things, and we're going to explore that a little bit before we take a short break. So at the moment, I'm only making GET requests, so I'm console logging method and URL. But I'm going to show you a tool called Postman. Right? So at this point, you've seen curl. Right? Did Don show you curl yesterday? Is that a yes? It was in the exercises. So you've seen curl. I'll say that I hate curl. I'm not that big of a nerd. Like I can't do it. I love the terminal, but I hate curl. I like this thing called Postman because what it lets me do is select the type of request that I want to make, like a GET request, and type in the URL, like and then just click send. And it sends that request. So I sent get localhost 8080. I got back woo. I say put localhost 8080 giraffe. And I go send. I still got back woo. What you're seeing is me selecting the type of thing. I delete giraffes. Send. And now if I look at what's getting console logged, I got, get, put, delete. All of those things are being sent off over to that side. Postman, I think, is going to be invaluable for you. Like, you will get some good mileage out of this tool. I'm going to write it in the notes. Use Postman. Curl is fine too. So what I want to do is, depending on the type of request, maybe send out different things. So inside of here, I might do something like, hey, if request.method is, get, then do a thing. Else do a different thing. Right? I might do something like this. I might even pick, what was the I am a teapot? 418? 418. Right? I can pick other status codes and play around with this. So now if I stop my server, restart, and go to Postman, anytime I make a GET request, I'm getting GET request. And anytime I make any other request, like delete, I get other request. And I can even check the status code in curl and in Postman, and it'll show me I'm a teapot. Okay. So I am writing right now my own logic for switching based on the method. And I can go even deeper. I could write my own logic in here to maybe switch on the URL that's coming in. So I might say, oh, get slash is the main page. And then there's another one here. I'll do slash dogs is the dogs page. And then maybe I'll just have a default page. Line 12. Boop. Yes. Dogs page. Right. Can you see how not great this is though? Can you imagine if you had a lot of pages? Start thinking about maybe what you might like to have to make this a little bit simpler, so you don't have to have a bunch of nested if statements. So right now what I've done is this, and I'm just going to test this out on my browser. Restarting my server, going to slash, and I get main page. I go to slash dogs, and I get dogs page, and I go to slash anything else, and I get default page. Okay? So there are, let's see, I'm going to say there's two things that I want to show in here right now. Is I can return things that aren't just text. I can return a whole bunch of stuff, including some HTML. So say that I had an HTML file in here. Say that I have some HTML file. And in this file I have an H1 that says index page. Welcome to my page. And then maybe I have a similar page that's called dogs page. And it says, I love dogs. Dogs are cool. Dogs are not cats. No, I like cats. But just some nice facts about dogs. I have two different pages here right now. Cool. And you can call this one dogs.html. If I have some files like index.html, dogs.html, I could choose in my server.js to somehow return that page. And I could do that with the HTTP module in this way here. I could go var, maybe home page equals, and then I could use the file system to read file sync index.html. And I could do the same thing here for dogs. dogs.html. And then when I return a response, I might be able to in here go like home page. And here I might go dogs page. There's one thing though that I'll need to do before I send this back is I'm going to slap some more information on the response header by saying response set the content type to text/HTML. And this is going to tell the browser or the client that the stuff it receives back is some HTML. Again, I want you to see how like laborious this is right now, because in the second half of the lecture, once we take we're going to take a short break in a minute, we're going to look at a tool that's going to make this simpler, right? It's going to take a lot of the work that we're doing away. So I'll say that as well with the dogs page. Just going to restart my server. Whoops, forgot to import FS. I need to make sure that FS is imported before I use it. Cool. And now when I go to slash, I get this index page, and notice how it's styled. And if I go to slash dogs, I get my dogs page. And again, notice how it's styled. Now, depending on the browser, if you don't put in the set header, it may or may not identify that it's looking at HTML. So Chrome doesn't seem to have an issue with it, but some other browser, if you don't set the header and explicitly say that I'm looking at content type text HTML, it might just show you a bunch of text. And now, if I was to use, let me just restart the server real quick. If I was to use Postman to make a GET request to slash dogs, I get back a bunch of HTML. Okay? So we don't just have to send back text. We can send back HTML. We could send back some JSON if we really wanted to. We could do that by doing something like here, instead of, I'll have a return object maybe. Just some object. And maybe I want to return this. Something that I can do is stringify that return object as JSON, right? And say response.setHeader, that the content type of the response is application/JSON. Like, that's the thing that I'm allowed to do as well. And now I've made a server that returns back all sorts of different stuff. All sorts. Again, I'm not expecting you to like memorize this, right? What I'm expecting you to do is ask yourself, hey, what would I do if I wanted to send back HTML, and then Google that, right? The thing is about forming those questions. Yes? So the question for Calgary was, does set header make the complete header, or does it add to the header? That's a really good question. It adds. Right? I could do whatever I want and just set headers. So now, if I set the server to start again and I make a GET request to slash anything to trigger that route, I got back that JSON object that I said I wanted to return, and with Postman I can check the headers, and then I should be able to see content type application JSON and Nima's header. Haha, what up, Yeezy, right? Because I put that in there. Right. So when I say slap something on, I genuinely mean like you're just slapping anything you want on it, right? It's like being at the deli and there's just like, when you wrap the thing up and they put a sticker on it. That's what a response header is. You just like, then they mail it out. Okay. I know that was a lot to kind of get through, right? We're going to take a break unless there are questions right now. Yes. That's a good question. So the question was, when do we use // when we're linking the HTML for the like files? I mean, generally, if I go // like this should still work. Like dot just refers to in my current directory, go to this file. If I don't put this here, like the program should be smart enough to know that it should look for the file in the current directory. But you might maybe sometimes use like libraries or something that just aren't smart enough to do that, and they'll ask you to go // In general, I tend to just go // all the time, right? So dot stands for in my current directory, right? And that's gonna be on your terminal as well. If I wanted to, like, open up, there's a command called cat on your terminal. Cat that prints out anything you give it, like, cat dogs HTML is gonna print out dogs HTML. And if I go cat // dogs HTML, same thing happens. So generally, that's the same thing. Cool. Any other questions? None from Calgary, it seems. So we're going to take a break, and at 12:18, we're going to continue. Does that sound good? Sorry, at 10:18. Yeah, in 2 hours. No, at 10:18, we'll pick up and we'll continue again. All right. It's my yes. So, Calgary, can you just toss me a thumbs up when the audio is working for you again? Um, and we'll hop right into it. Nima's on time, 12:18. All good, awesome. And we got most people back here. So, what we're going to do is now. Oh, Christoph says wait. I will wait. Yes, I will wait. How about throw me like another thumbs up when it's good to go. Oh, not everyone's back. Tisk tisk. Tut tut. No, that's all good. We have time. Let me know when people are back. In the meantime, does anybody have any jokes you want to share? No. Has anybody learned a new instrument recently? Yeah. Wait, what are you learning? A baritone ukulele. Is that like a guitar? Oh, okay. Cool. Cool. Huh. Baritone ukulele. Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I'll look at that. How big is it? Okay. Cool. Cool. Yeah. Nice. All right. I might look into it. I've been trying to learn guitar for a little while. It's fun, but like you just kind of get sucked into that world of like four chords all the time. So I need to take classes or something. Cool. So are we good to go, Calgary? Like, is it okay if I start? Oh, awesome. Thanks. That's me after not being able to figure out a song for a while. Cool. So what we're going to do with this second half of the lecture is just basically trash all the work that I've done so far. Right? Just trash it. We're gonna go like, ugh, there's an easier way to do things. This part is where I say, enter, a good kind of part of the lecture, Express. Now, Express is men and women's clothing. No, wrong one. ExpressJS.com. These are nice clothes. So, Express is a fast, unopinionated, minimalist web framework for Node.js. What this means for us is that somebody has written a bunch of code, somebody's written a bunch of JavaScript code, right, that's going to wrap around much of the functionality that we just did a second ago, right? Somebody's written a bunch of code that alleviates the pressure of having to write those nested if statements. So with Express, we're going to be declaring routes. We're going to declare routes for HTTP stuff. I'm going to jump into that in a second, but first what I'm going to do is, under the getting started, I'm going to go to Hello World, because the documentation for Express is amazing. It's really good. Here's Hello World. So I'm going to literally just copy these lines. I'm just going to copy those lines. I'm going to go to a folder that I've made called Express Demo. And in my server.js, you'll see that there's nothing. I'm going to paste in that stuff. Now, to use Express, I need to have Express installed. So I would go to that folder and I would go npm install Express. Right, so I would do this to make sure that I can then use Express, because it is an npm module. So all that information, by the way, again, is in the documentation under installing. But it's one command, npm install. Now the hello world is the thing that I pasted in. I want us to just take a look at this. And can anybody toss out a guess as to what this code might do? Yeah. So for Calgary, that was when we go to the home page, or I assume you mean just slash, right? It prints out hello world on the browser. Absolutely, right? And there's a couple things in here that made that kind of simpler to read. The word get and the slash right here. What do you think would happen if I did this? What do you think this would do? Any guesses? Yes? Yeah. When I make a post request to that same route, then it'll print out boo. So the syntax fundamentally looks a little different than what we were looking at with that HTTP like create server thing that I did. Right? But in 2 lines I've been able to declare 2 different routes. Right? 2 different things that should happen on get slash and post slash. Yes. Oh, good eye. So before the break, I had written res.end, and now I'm writing res.send, and you're asking if there's a difference between the two. The answer is yes, because before the break, I was working with the HTTP module. And the HTTP module, when I want to send a response, it goes response.end, right? Exactly, right? So this is the way I would do stuff in the HTTP module. Status code, set header, right? I was doing this stuff. With Express, I can just go res.send, and there's some default headers that get applied. There's some default behavior. Right? Now I'm going send, and I'm sending some strings. Now, we could see this stuff in action if I started on my server. Again, my server hangs. Right? I've put in a callback here that says when the server starts listening, this is what it console logs. Right? It's on port. Let's do port 8080 just to be the same as the other one. So listening on port 8080. When I go into Postman and I make a request to port 8080 slash right now, I get back body is hello world, and if I made it a post request, I get boo. Right, let's do that again. I get hello world. Right, so I've declared some routes. That's something that I want to draw your attention to, is that this stuff here, the HTTP server stuff that I did before, it was like I was putting out a bunch of steps. When a request comes in, if the thing looks like this, and then if this other part is this, then you should do that. Right? I'm like listing out a bunch of things to check and do. Here, it's much more expressive, and it's like as if it's declaring something. App.post to slash returns hello world. Right? All in one place, no pollution from other stuff, right? I'm just declaring one thing. Here's another one. Oh, sorry, app.get I meant. And this other one is app.post. Right? Yes, thanks. He says, what is the difference? Oh, no. Why is the listen method always at the bottom? Wouldn't it be better to declare what port is listening to before? That's a good question. I'll be honest. Let's see. Will it still work if I put the listen method at the top? So I'm going to move this up above I make any of my routes. Above where I make any of these. And if I restart my server and test out the things, like it still works. I'll say that it's convention to put the listening at the way down at the bottom. KV, is there anything you want to toss in on that? Why do we put the listen at the bottom? But it still works, is the thing. Mhm. 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 Okay. Yeah. Well, cool.
Important thing I think there is like it's a good question. That's the kind of stuff that usually clients see like fully understand.
So some from KV, the answer to that was it might be that we want to register the routes before we start listening, because if the listen happens way up top and say we have thousands and thousands of routes before the other ones get registered, but the thing has started listening, there might be a couple milliseconds where somebody can access the server at routes that haven't been registered yet. But on top of that, that's a really good question, and those are things that like I do encourage you to test out and see, like what I did right now. What happens when I move the order of the thing? Right? That's something that's definitely worth experimenting with. The other question from Calgary was, what is the difference in terms of what we see between get and post? I'm going to assume that what you mean by what we see is what we see as the client in our response, right? Nothing. There's no real difference, right? There's no actual difference. I am encoding the type of request that I'm making on the way in. So this is a get request, or this is a post request, right? We can make our server return different things based on those different like request methods. But there's nobody forcing us to do that. You're going to find as you're working on your projects that there's some standards that you might want to follow, and I want you to kind of run into that as you work through TinyApp. Now, was there another one here? Nope. Okay, so I've declared some routes here. I've made app get /dogs, and this one's going to say dogs, right? And when I go and make a request to my newly restarted server at get/dogs and send, I get dogs. I do want to point your attention to the fact that I'm using Postman a lot, and that's because through the browser over here in the URL space, I can only make get requests. I can't make post requests through here. I can't make put or deletes. So anytime I want to test those things, I'll test them out in Postman. Right? You're going to learn about how to make those other requests through here, right, through the browser eventually. Meaning as in probably by the end of the day or early tomorrow. So again, in these lines here, I have essentially replicated much of the behavior that was happening with this. The only difference might be that I'm not using HTML like responses yet, but we're going to do that in a second. I can do all sorts of funky stuff here. I'm going to put a little bit of formatting here just so that these are a little bit more evident, just by throwing some curly braces on these things. Right, but these are still callbacks. And I could do something like this. I could say get to / we're going to go dogs returns back all of the dogs somehow. And I want to have another route that says app get like this to res.send just one dog by ID. Do you notice what I've done here? So I declared a route that goes get /dogs, and I declared another route that says get /dogs /something. And I've parameterized that thing. I've said the thing that comes after dogs, say that's some ID. Let me go even like more explicit. Some dog ID. And now what I'm going to see is if I go and I restart my server, and I'm just going to use my browser for this. I'm going to go to /dogs, and what I should get back is all the dogs. And when I go to /dogs /12, I get just one dog by ID. Any number.
Any like letter character?
Any letter character. Right? Anything. So anything that comes afterwards, we're on the other side going to be calling that thing some dog ID. And what's really cool is that on this side here, I can access that. I could go console.log, and notice how I've made these callbacks receive a request and a response. Okay, you could call this request response if you want. You're going to find that by convention, people write it as rec and res. But I could console log rec.params. And what I'm going to see happening when I make a request now to this is that I get params being an object with the keys matching whatever I wrote after the colon and the value matching whatever was passed in the URL. Right? So again, dogs colon some ID. So when I look at rec.params, that's what I get over here. Some dog ID. And when this is used over here as dogs, Otis maybe, I make this request. And over on the console logging side, I'm getting some dog ID is Otis. Super powerful. I've made this like generic route that can receive information and maybe do stuff with it. Okay? Say I had a dogs array. So Otis is in here, right? And I'm going to say Otis is breed. What breed is Otis? Like a French Bulldog or something? Frenchie mix. Size, pretty teeny. Personality, feisty. Right? Anybody want to put their dog in this list? Got a dog? What's that? Huxley. All right. So Huxley, any info you want to put in for Huxley? So breed, black lab. Cool. Size? Too big. And personality? Gregarious. Okay. So you got gregarious personality. Cool. And now something that I might do over on get/dogs is I might want to send back all of the dogs. So I've replaced the word send with JSON because there's a method already built into Express that lets you do all of the setting application JSON and the stringifying. All that's done for you. I can just say res.json and send back an object. And what I'm going to see now is when I go and I restart my server here, when I go to /dogs, I got back all of the dogs in JSON format, right? I can test this out with Postman as well. Go to /dogs, and I got all the dogs in JSON format. That's really cool, right? All that work's done for me. Here's another thing that I could do is when I want to get a dog by ID, I could grab that dog by ID from the dogs and send it. Was that a question over there? Yeah? Why don't I have to do res.app.json? So the thing is here, I'm given the response. I'm given the response, and I'm saying the response, send back some JSON with that response, right? This doesn't really have anything, like, it's not something that lives within an app. The way that the structure here is set up is that app will pass the request and the response into this callback. Right? So it looks similar a little bit to what we did over here, where again, see, I was getting request and response earlier before the break. And I could go response.end, right? Except now I'm going response.json because we're dealing with Express that gives us that. Okay. So if I start my server again, what I'm going to see is these are all my dogs, And if I go dogs/Otis, I get back Otis. And if I go dogs/Huxley, I get back Huxley. Right? Did you wave a Huxley? Yeah. Right? So that's what we're seeing now. And this code here, if you stare at it long enough, it starts making some good sense in its declaration, right? Maybe the syntax you're a little unsure about. That's totally fine, right? But I want you to be like a little bit comfortable with the flow of what's going on. I've defined some different routes, right? And they do different things. Okay, so I want to hop into I want to hop into a little bit of an extension of this. Just take a look at what I have prepared for the demo here. I want to talk about views. So it's not always very useful for me to just send back JSON data all the time. I might want to send back HTML pages, right? Just like I did earlier with the dogs example that I made with the create server thing. Now, when I did it in here, I had to go fs require and load up the pages by hand like this. There is a way for me to do that in Express. It'll just require one thing. It'll require a thing called EJS templates. Embedded JavaScript templates. This is going to be your source of both joy and frustration this week. I think you'll both love and hate this, but with enough time. EJS is a language that lets us write HTML that has JavaScript embedded into it. Right? We're going to see the functionality of that in a second, but we're going to start off with just installing EJS. Oops. So I'm going to give you the link to the documentation for installing EJS. But what it'll involve is, first of all, going into your terminal and going npm install EJS. So we wait for that to happen. And then the next thing that you'll do is take this line of code here. And what this line is saying is, I want to return responses using a view engine, and that view engine is EJS. And the EJS engine, like, that's going to be triggered by a particular thing, and that thing is this here. Let me just save this somewhere for us. If I replace the word JSON with render. So if I change the word JSON to render here instead of, send, what Express is going to try to do is it's going to try and find an HTML file. I'm going to try and find an HTML file that matches the name, maybe dogs. So I'm going to need a couple steps to do this, and I'll work you through it. I'm saying render the dogs page. This is what I'm saying here. When there's a request to get /dogs, I want to render the dogs page. When I try to run my server right now, when I try to run my server right now and go to /dogs, I get an error. And this error here is telling me it can't find the page called dogs at this path. Express demo, views, dogs. So what I'm going to need to do is inside of my Express demo folder, make a folder called views, which is going to house all of my HTML files. Right? Inside of here, I'm going to make a file called dogs.html. Notice that there's nothing written right now. This is blank. I'm going to restart my server. I'm going to try to go to that URL. What we get here? Failed to look up view dogs. Oh, whoops, sorry. This is supposed to be called dogs.ejs. I got a little ahead of myself. The view that I made is called dogs.ejs. Save this, restart my server, and now I'm going to go to /dogs. Okay. What do we see on the page? Nothing. What had I written on the page? Absolutely nothing. That's fine. I can go to my EJS file here, which is essentially just an HTML file. So if I was to copy over my stuff from before, for example, dogs page, that's my EJS file. You'll find that when you edit EJS, you don't have to restart the server. Now I'm getting the dogs page. I can write anything I want here. Now EJS is cool for two main reasons. One is that I can write any arbitrary JavaScript that I want in here, as long as I write it within these tags. So I'm going to give you the documentation to look at this, and it's going to take you a while to get comfortable with it. But you'll see within the HTML, I can write angle bracket, %, equal sign, and then I can write 3 plus 5. End it off with a % and angle bracket. And when I go ahead and refresh, I got 8. I never wrote the number 8. I wrote 3 plus 5. Right? So that JavaScript stuff, this 3 plus 5 is getting evaluated, and then the output of this thing is being placed onto the page. This is getting evaluated and gets placed on the page. I can do all sorts of crazy things here. What if I had a for loop? And you're going to find that with EJS, on every new line that you make, you're going to need to have those weird EJS tags. You'll notice that sometimes I write the EJS tags with an equal sign, and other times I remove the equal sign. So when I write some JavaScript that I don't want the output to be placed on the screen, like the beginning of this for loop, I don't put an equal sign. Same with this curly brace here. I don't put an equal sign. But inside of this, maybe I do want the letter, the value of I to get printed out. So here I'm using a for loop to generate a bunch of paragraph tags. Whack. That is cool. Yeah. Yeah, it's printed as a paragraph because I said a paragraph, but I could change this to anything. I could change this to an EM if I wanted to and see what that does. So now it's a bunch of italicized. Right. Was that a question over there? Yeah, you can put this stuff anywhere on the page, right? And bring in all sorts of stuff. What we're going to do with this is I'm going to take some data. I'm going to take some data and I'm going to pass it through to the particular thing. So I'm going to do this in 2 steps. First, I'm going to replace this res JSON with a res render. Maybe I'll call this file show dog. So that means I need a view called show dog. Show dog, and in here I'm just going to say one dog page. So now I have 2 different views. One is for when you're looking at all the dogs, and one's for when you're looking at like a particular dog. And what I'm going to do is I want to use that page to show just that one dog. And I can do that by doing this. Res render is going to take a argument afterwards, one parameter, and that parameter is an object. To that object I can pass things like anything, any key value. That key value might be now, it feels awkward for people to write this stuff in one line, so often what we'll do is we'll make a variable and call it something like template variables, where we can store all of those useful things. And what we're going to see now is that I will have access on the show dog page. I will have access to the dog like stuff. So I'm just realizing right now I didn't give each of these dogs like the name. So let me just go name is Otis. And this one here is going to be name Huxley. I'm also, for the purposes of this demo, going to change this to an array of things. You'll be angry at me later, but for right now, just this is going to be an array of things so that I can loop through it later. So template vars receives that one dog, and I'm going to do, instead of this being like the name of the dog, it'll be like 0 or 1 to be the index of the dog. Passing in through the template vars, and over here I'm going to say dog dot name. Let me restart the server, refresh this at 1, so index 1, and I get Huxley. And I go 0, and I get Otis. What? What? So using the index, I'm going to go find the dog, take the dog, pump it into the render, right? And on this other side here, this template, I get to use all that information. Right? So any of the things that I put inside of this template vars object, that gets unpacked on the template side, and I can use all of those things. So I have the dog name. I also have dog breed, size, and personality. There you go. Right, we have, at this point, pretty much everything you need to make a really cool functional website. Right, I'm making a request. The request is being handled. It's getting the data that's useful, and it's sending it back. Right? In this case here, I have declared a route that gives me all sorts of different info based on what I've asked it for. Right? I might also have on the dogs page here, instead of making a for loop that prints out this, I might do, imagine that I passed all of the dogs to this page, print out dogs I dot name, and a p tag here, meaning that in the server I'll have to, when I render dogs, pass it all of the dogs. Does that make sense? Cool. So now when I go to just slash, after, restarting my server, what do I get here? Dogs is not defined. Because, my bad, somebody should have called me out on this. This should be dogs is dogs. So I have to make an object with stuff in it. Right? The way I catch myself from making that error is I'll always go let template vars and do all the stuff that I need to in here. And then my res render always just looks like name of the view and then template vars. Okay? So I'll do that again. And I got Otis and Huxley. Now, there's so much more that you can do with this. There's so much more. You can make a form to add dogs to it, right? I will have an example in here, I'm pretty sure already prepared for you. Actually, no, I don't. I lied. I didn't do that. But you're going to do it as part of your assignment. So, are there questions about what I've done so far? Yes.
Can you use that to like manipulate the HTML that's already on the web page? For example, like if you wanted to have some sort of function that figures out like something and then like manipulates like something in a paragraph tag.
I mean, I guess. So the question was, can you use this here to manipulate stuff that's already on the page? And I mean, you could. So you haven't done a lot of client-side JavaScript yet, but one thing that you could do is in here make a script tag. You can make a script tag, and you could actually use this stuff to write JavaScript that's would look something like this, like console.log, and then or whatever, like you would write JavaScript in here that would then turn into HTML that is JavaScript. I don't know if that's exactly what you mean. That's a really good question, and that's actually something that I think we should talk about one-on-one. But generally, no. If I was to boil this down to one thing, it's we have a pipeline. A request comes in, and a response should go out. And there's all kinds of stuff that we can do within that pipeline to prepare that response. Right? We can attach status codes to it. We can set headers. Right? And one of the things that we can do is we can pass it through this view template pipeline as well on the way out. Right? What gets sent out from the response, right, is a baked thing. So this here is a blueprint for a page. As part of the pipeline, we will bake a real page using this blueprint, and we send out that real page. What time is it? 10:56. I'm going to mention two last things. One is the fact that if you noticed in my server earlier, I was doing things like status code. You can absolutely still do that with Express. I want you to Google that. You also noticed me going set header. You can absolutely still do that with Express. I want you to Google how to do that. Right? The syntax for it is not going to be very complicated. It'll just look different than this. Right? The other thing that I want to say is there's a concept called middleware. So as you read about Express, you're going to learn, or you're going to see the word middleware a lot, and that looks like this. Middleware. Middleware is code that you want to run between the request and the response. That is middleware. Code that you always want to run between the request and the response, right? Notice how generic and vague that term is. Okay? You're going to do some readings on this stuff. It's still going to feel a little vague for the rest of the day, but over time, you can get a little bit clearer about this. Right? To show you an example of middleware, I'm going to write a thing here that says app.use. App.use, a new request has been made. Notice how it's not app.get or app.post. And then I also have this next thing in here. When I start my server, every time I make a request to the page, I'm just refreshing a bunch of times. see that a new request has been made got printed out? So I wrote a function that I'm just fitting into that pipeline to do something. Right? So I'm not telling you right now what I might want to do with these functions that I put in. Right? But over the course of your Tiny App project, you'll explore different kinds of middleware. Right? But this, at its very basic, is something that happens between the request and the response. Sound good? Cool. I think I'm going to leave it at that. In the notes, I'm going to put in the word Morgan. Oh, right. Sweet. Thanks for that. Link in the notes. And I want you to look at whatever Morgan is when I link it in there. Calgary has a question about how do you add an element on click to interact with the server? So one thing that you can do is use an HTML form element. If you make a form element on your HTML page with a bunch of inputs, form element with a bunch of inputs and a submission button type submit. What you can do with the form is give it an action and a method. Now the reason I'm zooming through this a little bit is because you're going to explore this over the course of your Tiny App project. But you'll be able to write things like this form posts to /dogs, and it'll post a bunch of data. Right? Again, you're going to explore this tomorrow, right, in lecture. So I don't want you to feel as if I'm like leaving you hanging. It's just that that's a fantastic question. That's a really, really good question. So I'm like, I really want to answer it, but I can't. Other than hint, hint, look at this. But you'll have assignments on this stuff today and tomorrow. You're gonna get good with it. Calgary, I hope that's good for you. Thanks. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's a really good question. What's that? One's from Thomas. Does EJS utilize refresh to restart the server? So no, actually with EJS, that's stuff that happens at runtime. So you don't actually need to refresh the server because every time that you make a request, Node is going to go grab whatever file you had made and put that into the pipeline. I would still, though, get into the habit of just refreshing things all the time, as in like restarting the server every time. You're going to learn something tomorrow that'll make it a little bit simpler to work with. Cool. Yeah, actually, you know what? I'll put that into here. Look up whatever NodeMon is. NodeMon. You'll learn about this more, but if you want, you could read this. Cool. Thank you for sticking through for an exceptionally long lecture, 11:02. I hope you're excited for working with HTTP and web servers. Anybody planning on getting that tattoo? No? Okay, well, rethink it. I'm going to be here for the rest of the day, and then we have a breakout this afternoon where we'll talk about ES6. We won't be doing more of this stuff this afternoon. Okay, cool. So see you all in a couple of hours.